actually, you're going to be disappointed unless you like energy and laughter in the morning. So, yeah. And spontaneity. Well, our speaker is the artistic director of Synergy Theater, an improvisational theater company that performs completely improvised plays at the Leisure Center for the Arts in Walnut Creek. He began his career in New York City and has been improvising plays for over 30 years. In addition to performing improvisational theater, he uses the discipline of applied improvisation to lead corporate development workshops in key areas such as team building, leadership development, creativity, innovation, and maybe organizations like Rotary someday, who knows? Our speaker invented the Story Spine, a simple tool for learning and practicing the basics of storytelling, which has been embraced by improvisers, writers, and educators the world over. And he's the author of the book, How to Improvise a Full-Length Play, The Art of Spontaneous Theater. And he's a former Rotarian. So let's have a real showbiz welcome for Kenn Adams.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here. I will start off by telling you a little bit about myself, a little bit about improvisational theater and how it applies to corporate training and education, as well as entertainment. But the truth is, I am much more of a workshop leader than a speaker. And that means that a certain amount of today is going to be audience participation, which means everybody up and working a little bit. So just a little bit of a forewarning, there will be a time when I will ask you to stand up. And there might even be a time where I ask you to speak out loud. So we're going to have a great deal of fun together. I was born in Brooklyn, New York. Everybody mentioned I started off in New York. Any Brooklyn people here? Yeah.
Bronx.
All right, Bronx is good too.
You got a problem with that?
We got a lot of comedians in this place. We can give you a...
We got some Jersey over here.
Yeah. All right, Jersey works. Thank you very much.
To the accent.
Well, I worked very, very hard to get rid of that accent, so we'll see if it comes out in any of the improvisation. I studied theater in school when I was young. What I originally wanted to do was be a playwright, and I was very lucky to grow up in New York with a mom who would take me to a bunch of Broadway shows. So from the very earliest age, I was really captivated by professional Broadway theater. Some things that stand out in my mind, I remember seeing the original production of Dracula in the 1970s with Frank Langella. And it was that production that really galvanized my interest in the theater and made me want to pursue that. So playwriting was my original aspiration. And then as I got into college, there wasn't really so much playwriting classes being offered. And so in high school and college, I started, of course, getting interested in acting. And I always loved being on the stage, but making up the story and writing the dialogue was always more of my passion. So eventually, after the first 2 or 3 colleges had a questionable relationship with me, I ended up at Brooklyn College in Brooklyn, New York, which was an awesome school. And when I was there, I met a friend named Yvonne, and Yvonne was working with an improv company, and I had never even heard of this thing. Back in the day, improvisation was not really such a big deal. Nowadays, every high school and every college has an improv team, and everybody is familiar with it from the television show, Whose Line Is It Anyway? And so improvisation has finally become a bit of a household word. But back in the 80s, when I was in college, it was not. So I started going to these lunchtime improvisation workshops, and I learned all about it, and I was immediately hooked. Improvisation is the art of spontaneous theater. So improvisers take suggestions from the audience, they jump up on stage, and then using those suggestions from the audience and some interpersonal skills, which we'll explore today together, they make up theater on the spot. They create the dialogue, they create the characters. So they're really doing the work of the playwright, the director, and the actor all at the same time, and all right off the top of their head. So suddenly I found this thing that allowed me to create plays like a playwright, plus also have all of the fun of being on stage and getting all of the applause and laughter from the audience. And I was immediately hooked. So from that point on, improvisation became my career. I still continued to write plays for a while, but over the course of a number of years, I was able to thankfully start earning some money through improvisation with this company in New York that is now called Freestyle Repertory Theater, and they're still going strong. Yvonne, the woman who I met at Brooklyn College, she was working with them, and that's how I made my way into professional improvisation. When I started working with them, I was working, they were performing a certain type of format called theater sports, which was just the name of the show and a way to perform improvisational theater. They taught me everything I know. Eventually, after 10 years of working with that company, I moved out here to California and began my own company, Synergy Theater, that Buddy mentioned in the intro. And what Synergy Theater does is we perform full-length improvised plays, and we do that in the style of different playwrights and movie genres. So as a matter of fact, we just opened up our brand new show for our brand new season last night. We had a wonderful opening show. I put some postcards out on some of the tables, so I'll mention this before, but you'll see it. Our current show is called Spontaneous Hitchcock, an improvised play in the style of the master of suspense. So that's what we do. We study famous playwrights and movie makers, authors, and then we improvise and make up the shows in the style of their work. And that is usually what improvisation does. It sets out to entertain the audience by creating theater on the spot. However, there are other very important applications for improvisation as well. And in fact, it has become quite popular in some of these other applications. So for example, it is very, very big in the field of education. And one of the things that Synergy Theater does, in addition to performing our shows for adults, is we have a very, very strong youth outreach program in which we travel into public schools and we not only put on shows for young audiences, but we also teach the art of theater and improvisation to young people in school. I work a lot with kids from kindergarten all the way up through high school. And in a few moments, I'm going to share with you the rules of improvisation, those interpersonal skills that we use in order to create theater. And you'll see, I think, how sharing these skills with children in school growing up really allows them to work on their social skills, their presentation skills, their collaborative skills, plus it builds tolerance and empathy the way any type of study of theater does by allowing you to walk in the shoes and live in the life of another person in order to understand where they're coming from. So this idea of taking improvisation and bringing it into the public schools and sharing it with children is very, very popular. And there is a huge industry is not quite the right word, but there are thousands of very talented improvisational teaching artists all over the world every day sharing this wonderful joy of self-affirmation and self-confidence with kids in school. The other thing we do is we apply improvisation to business soft skills such as communication and leadership development. And this time industry really is the right word because there are improvisational theater companies out there and there are trainers out there who spend time working with all of the major companies in the world, bringing improvisation to their teams, their executive leadership teams in order to encourage leadership development, and all teams from their sales teams to their customer service teams. Because again, in a few moments when I share these rules with you, you will see how improvisation leads to being able to create a spontaneous and collaborative team in any situation, where you can analyze what is the obstacle that needs to be overcome and learn how to work collaboratively by taking personal egos off the line, prioritizing the goals of the team above the individual goals, and getting the job done in the most effective way. Improvisation in business has become so widespread and so acknowledged as being important that there are universities around the nation now that offer improvisation classes not in their theater school, but in their business school. Because they understand how important these interpersonal skills, what we once used to call soft skills, are to effective teams. In fact, the fact that improvisation is so popular in the United States today all can trace its roots back to its use as a tool, as an education tool, rather than an entertainment tool. Because in fact, it all started back in the 50s with this woman named Viola Spolin, who is generally acknowledged to be the inventor of modern improvisation. She was an actor, but more importantly, she was a teaching artist. And back in the 50s, she was teaching theater to a bunch of immigrant children who did not speak English. And so she wasn't quite sure how she was going to be able to relate to them. So what she started to do was to take her theater training and create a whole bunch of what she referred to as theater games, which were ways that she could relate to the children and have them begin to express themselves without needing to depend on the English language or a shared common language. And what she came up with then was a series of games that used gibberish, in which you weren't speaking any particular language at all, but just making up a nonsense language. And it was all about the emotional expression and the physical and the relationship between the characters on stage physically, as opposed to the words they were saying. And she went on and created a number of these theater games that she used with these kids. Viola Spolin had a son named Paul Sills, and Paul Sills had a friend named David Shepard, and Paul Sills and David Shepard in the 1950s, they learned from Viola Spolin what she was doing, and they were the first ones with a couple of college friends who started performing some of these games for an audience, and that became what we all acknowledge to be the beginning of professional improvisational theater in the United States. So it all owes its roots to education, its application towards education and training, as opposed to entertainment. So I've been talking about these 3 rules of improvisation. Let me share them with you. And improvisers all over the world use these same rules, but we phrase them differently. So this happens to be my particular way of phrasing them, but people describe them in all different ways, but you'll see it all boils down to the same thing. So the first rule of improvisation, as Synergy Theater teaches it, is be spontaneous. And what we mean by be spontaneous at first is simply to act on your instinct and say the first thing that pops into your mind. So
Whoa.
much,
Whoa.
There are 2 other rules which will prevent you from saying that. Right. Very often, the reason we have obstacles in life and on stage is because we are simply too afraid to share our individual voices and to share our individual creativity with other people. And that makes sense because from a very early age, we learn not to do that. We are made fun of if we speak up and say something foolish, or if we have an unpopular opinion, or at work, if people ask you to brainstorm a solution and you say something, immediately 3 people will tell you why that's not a good idea, right? So we learn at a very early age to guard ourselves and not share of ourselves. And of course, that is deadly when you're trying to put on a show on stage. The whole art form of theater is about being vulnerable and sharing yourself with the audience. If you can't do that, then the show is not going to be effective because there won't be characters that the audience can relate to and empathize with. Certainly in work or at school, if you're unable to share yourself, you are not only missing out on your involvement with the world, but you are depriving the world of your contribution to it. So we spend a lot of time practicing accepting your own creativity without being a self-editor and without criticizing yourself for your ideas, but to share them out there. The second level of spontaneity is a little bit deeper, and that has to do with staying in the present moment for as long as that moment lasts. So it's important when you're on stage, if you're in a scripted play, that you are making the audience believe your character has never lived through this moment before. Romeo and Juliet never met before that day, even though the actors have been practicing for weeks and they met several times. But the audience needs to believe they're seeing a spontaneous moment of the character's life. When you're improvising, you need to create that effect for the audience too. And of course, in fact, it should be easier when you're improvising because you are in fact doing it for the first time. You haven't rehearsed this moment, but nonetheless, we spend so much time in our head. And this is again, how it starts to apply to the business life and your personal life and education is we spend so much time stressing out over what can go wrong or what we did a moment ago that we weren't happy with, or what's going to happen when this person finds out about that. We're so in our head that we are very reluctant to really stay in the moment and just explore that moment in time and allow it to feel however it feels. So we practice that a lot. In fact, it has a lot in common with mindfulness and mindful meditation. And a lot of improvisers have a mindful meditation practice as well, because that concept of staying in the moment, experiencing what it's like to be in that moment, whether it's perfect or not, and then accepting that and moving on is something very important. So rule number 1, be spontaneous. Rule number 2 is make your partner look good. Make your partner look good. And this is something that is a little non-intuitive about improvisation, because most people, when they perform improvisation, are performing comic improvisation. The point is to make the audience laugh. Most audiences are expecting that. However, that is not really the goal of improvisational theater. Improvisational theater, the goal is to create theater. And just like some theater is comedic, but other theater is dramatic or suspenseful or tragic, so too improvisation can be all of those things. So we don't like to think of ourselves as improvisational comedians. We prefer to think of ourselves as theater practitioners, and our way of making theater happens to be improvised rather than written and rehearsed. So our goal is not to go out there and get laughs. I say that because one way of getting laughs is to somehow point out the flaws of your partner. And I think this also applies to school life and work life, right? We often try to raise ourselves up by knocking someone else down. Or we try to gain attention at work by taking credit for something that perhaps wasn't all of your doing. Because people feel that if anybody else is being successful, that means I'm being less successful. So I have to be more successful by making everybody else less successful. And of course, it's very easy to get laughs by doing that. But since we're not out there to get laughs, and if you keep making your partners less successful than you, nobody's going to want to perform improvisation with you. So rule number 2 is always make your partner look good. It's a team sport. I succeed by making you successful, and you succeed by making me successful. I think already you can start to see some of the application towards business organizations. How can teams learn to work better together, not only within their original teams, but with instant teams that come together to work on a project? If we are able to take those egos off the line and immediately just start thinking, what is the goal of this project and how can I make you successful in your necessary contribution, and how can you make me successful in mine, suddenly we're all performing together better. So that's true on stage and true off stage as well. So number 1 is be spontaneous. Number 2 is make your partner look good. Number 3 is build on your partner's idea. Build on your partner's idea. So in theatrical improvisation, we are usually trying to tell some type of a story. And our stories have to have a beginning and a middle and an end. So if I suggest something that adds to what we call the foundation of the story, the beginning of the story, like let's say I come into the stage and I make an offer. In improvisation, anything that we contribute to the scene, we call an offer. And if I make an offer and I say something like, wow, it's a beautiful day today, then it is my partner's obligation to build on that idea by accepting that it's a beautiful day today. So an offer like, yeah, look at the sunshine, would be a way of making me look good and building on my idea. An offer like, what are you crazy? It's raining and there's lightning coming in the sky, right? That would be what we call a block, because it took something that I added to the scene and it negated it. It made it untrue. So we try to accept offers and not block offers, because the bottom line is if we keep blocking offers, we can never get the story going. Because if everything I say is untrue, then we'll never get out of the beginning, and the audience becomes frustrated with that very, very quickly. So in theatrical improvisation, we build on our ideas in order to allow the story to unfold. And once again, I'm sure you could already start thinking how children learning these behaviors and adults in the workplace learning these behaviors allows for better teaming, better collaboration, and better chemistry that just allows the jobs to get done more quickly. So those are the 3 rules of improvisation. Be spontaneous, make your partner look good, and build on your partner's ideas. All right. Are you ready to do some improvisation? Yeah. Of course you are. All right. So here's that moment. Everybody, go ahead and stand up. You can do it. This part isn't hard. Stand up. All right. Excellent job. Now, we're going to start off with a couple of simple team building exercises. This is how we start off our rehearsals at Synergy Theater all the time. So it is helpful if everybody could be in a circle. So go ahead and turn inward and make a circle. If you're sitting at a table that doesn't have a whole bunch of people and you want to just migrate over to a table where there are a lot of people, that is great. All right. So here we go. The first thing you need to do is just find out who's going to start. So on the count of 3, everybody just point to the person at your table who's going to begin. 1, 2, 3. So this is very easy. This is called pass it around. And here's how it works. The person who's going to start is going to turn to the person to their right, make eye contact with them, and just clap their hands like that. When that person does that, the person who just received that signal, they're going to turn to their right and clap their hands and send it to the person next to them. And we're just going to send it around the circle 3 times until it comes back to character 1. So ready, here we go, 3 times, send it around, pass it around, pass it around. Faster, 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 faster. Oh, come on now. Excellent job. Now back the other way. Back the other way. All right. Excellent job. Excellent job. Now, here's the big trick. We mentioned that improvisation rule number 1 is be spontaneous, right? So we'll add a little level of spontaneity here. When it comes to you, when someone sends you the signal, you can either send it on to the person to your right, or you could just send it right back to the person who sent it to you. If it gets sent back to the person who sent it, then that person has to flip around and send it in the other direction. So the direction of the signal just keep changing from left to right, depending on where you want spontaneously start. What's that?
You have to stay at our table, right?
For now,
Okay.
if anybody wants to move to another table, that's fine. Sorry, is there something wrong?
We're gonna fight on ourselves.
It already fell apart. All right, the person who started before is going to start again, and it can go either way, to the left or the right. Be spontaneous. Ready and go. All right, good job. One more version. One more version. And now we travel. And now we can travel in any direction. So it can go to the left, it can go to the right, or it can go to someone across the table. Good job. All right. So we're warmed up a little bit, but we're going to stay on this idea of being spontaneous. I will ask for some audience volunteers. I promise anything that I ask you to come up and do will be absolutely safe and fun and easy. And I will remind everybody also what I said before, and it's really quite true and quite important. The point of improvisational theater is not to make jokes. It's not improvisational comedy, it is improvisational theater. So I don't want anybody to feel like if you're being put on the spot, you're being expected to have any type of result at all. It is simply an exercise in discovering if we can do these three things: be spontaneous, make our partner look good, and build on our partner's ideas. So I need one volunteer from each table to come up here. Who's it gonna be? You can do it one person from each table to walk up on stage.
I'm not going.
3, 4.
You don't have to go either.
Yeah, give a round of applause.
What is
Excellent job, excellent job. All right, and if everybody can kind of just take a few steps to the left so I can see everybody a little bit better. All right, beautiful job, beautiful job. I will point out that if you're not standing up here, it just means it's not your turn yet. All right, so we are going to continue to work on our spontaneity. And all this is a simple game called Pop Quiz. And it's going to work like this. I'm going to ask a question. And this is going to be a silly, ridiculous, made-up question. There's no real answer to it. And your job, when it's your turn, and it's just going to go down in order, your job is just to act as if you are an expert in this thing that we're talking about. And just answer the question. Just say anything at all. And my job is to make you look good and build on your idea by saying that you are correct. So I promise you that anything you say is going to be correct, all right? So I can't quite see everybody, but that's okay. We're just gonna go in order. What is your name? Dave. Dave. So we'll just start with Dave, and then the next question will be for the next person, all right? So here we go. Pop quiz. What is the name of the Queen of the Moon?
Mr. Butterworth.
Mr. Butterworth. That's absolutely correct. Mr. Butterworth has a crown, and what is it made out of?
Porcupines.
Porcupine. Mr. Butterworth gave his crown Porcupine, or her crown Porcupine, a very special name. What was its name?
skunk?
Skunk, yes, that's right. One day, the porcupine crown skunk ran away. Where did it go?
Dave's Auto Shop.
Yes. We went to Dave's Auto Shop. When it got to Dave's Auto Shop, Dave was doing something unexpected. What was Dave doing?
Changing a tire.
Yes, that's right. Because Dave doesn't usually work so early. So it was surprising that he was actually changing the tire. The tire belonged to somebody very important. Who did the tire belong to?
Himself.
Yes, that's right. It was Dave's own tire. And what happened? How did Dave's tire get damaged and need repair?
Ran over a porcupine.
That's absolutely. Awesome job, awesome job. So that was perfect. Everybody did a wonderful job at being spontaneous. But I think you can also see how the rules of improvisation cannot work alone. It is not enough to be spontaneous. You really need those other rules of improvisation as well. Make your partner look good and build on your partner's ideas. The reason that that was entertaining to the audience is because you saw us working together. If everything they said was wrong and I was trying to make them look foolish for having said it or get a laugh at their expense or something like that, it would not have been entertaining. Sometimes we get very, very short-term laughs from making other people look good, but it's that cruel, even if you're not trying to be cruel at the moment, but it's that basically cruel type of laughter that comes from mockery or seeing somebody else fail, as opposed to that joyous, communal celebration of laughter, of seeing people succeed and have fun together and build on each other's creativity. So be spontaneous. All right, let me have one more volunteer from every table. Come on up here. You can do it. You saw how fun and easy it was. You can do it. Come on. I'll do it.
Yeah, I'm gonna.
All right. So now the other two rules of improvisation, in addition to be spontaneous, are make your partner look good and build on your partner's ideas. I told you that the main goal of theatrical improvisation is to create stories. So we're going to work together and we're going to create a story together. And this is an exercise called the yes and story. The yes and story. So here's how it works. I'm going to start by just saying a simple sentence like a person did a thing. Marcia went to the movies or something like that. Holly, you're going to begin. The first thing you're going to do is just shout out at the top of your lungs with all kinds of enthusiasm the words yes and then you're just going to say the very next simple thing that happened. So if I say Marcia went to the movies, you might say yes and she bought some popcorn. We're not trying to be clever, we're not trying to be funny, we're just trying to be spontaneous, say the very first thing that pops into your mind and just have it be inspired by the thing your partner just said. And we'll just shoot down the row until we get to the last person and we'll see if we can end our story by the time we get to the last person. So all you have to do is shout out yes and say what happened next, all right? We're gonna do an action adventure story. So here we go. Marcia leapt out of the airplane.
Yes, and she didn't have a parachute.
Yes, and she landed in a cornfield in a desert. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, and in the desert, excellent. Go ahead, next.
Yes, and there was an oasis there.
Good. Yes! And then she drowned.
And then this big snake came out. And yes, and he saw stars.
She was received into heaven.
There it is, improvisation in action. All right, we'll do one more thing. How long do I get? Can I go till 8 o'clock or no?
You go to 8 o'clock.
Till 8 o'clock, all right, well, we better hurry up. All right, we'll do one more thing. I'll improvise a story for you, but it's going to be what we refer to as a what happens next story. So I'll tell a story, but every once in a while, I'll shout out to the audience. I'll try to stay here by the mic. So when you respond, kindly shout out your offers so that I can hear it nice and loudly. And we'll make up a little story together. As I mentioned, we are performing Spontaneous Hitchcock. We opened last night. We have a show tonight, tomorrow, Sunday matinee, and then we do it again next weekend at the Lesher Center for the Arts in Walnut Creek. We would love to see you all there. I put some postcards on the tables. Unfortunately, not on every table. I'm sorry, I didn't have that many left. But if you want to take a picture with it on your phone, or I have some business cards on the table in the back over there, you're welcome to grab one. Go on the website, it's all there. But anyway, we have Hitchcock on the brain lately, so we'll tell a story in the style of Alfred Hitchcock, and we only have a few minutes to do it, so let's get started. Somebody make up the title for a brand new story by Alfred Hitchcock. What might the title of a Hitchcock movie be?
And they covered her.
Say it again.
And they covered her.
And they covered her. A suspenseful story about the news media. There was once a woman whose name was Alfalfa.
Abigail.
Alfalfa Abigail lived by herself in a small apartment in New York City, 1963. She had a father once, but that father was no longer there. He died in a mysterious accident concerning a
Trash compactor.
a trash can. Each night, she would lie awake in bed, listening in her fevered imagination to the rumbling of the trash compactor. And the last words that she heard her father say before he was completely killed. And those words were,
Oh, this is crushing.
turn the darn thing up. But she did not. Because secretly, Alfalfa Abigail wished her father to be dead. Because he had stolen her crown, her mink. Back when people wore minks. That night, as she lay in bed, hearing the rumbling of the ghost compactor in her mind, suddenly the door to her apartment opened, and in walked the trash man, who had come to clean out the clogged drain of the trash compactor. But when he opened it up, out fell a thick, mysterious liquid. Right? The liquid expanded and expanded. From the liquid rose the ghost of her father. The ghost looked at her and said,
You didn't separate the trash right.
Have to take out the recycle.
yes, he said both of those things. And so, with shame, she was covered. And at the end, it covered her. The end. Very nice. We have maybe 1 or 2 minutes. If anybody has any questions about Synergy Theater or our mission or improvisation, I'll be very happy to entertain them. Yes.
I'm just curious, because, I think a lot of us who got started in the business world in the 70s or 80s, these in-person meetings were just de rigueur. Now, when you're looking at younger people who have spent a lot of screen time and, working on games remotely, or God forbid, Zoom meetings the past 2 years, is your job tougher, different? How do you describe that?
That's very interesting. In some ways, it is not tougher, because one thing that is different between back in the day and today is that there used to be an acceptance of a top-down hierarchical structure in organizations, and the boss was at top, and they just kind of yelled down instructions to everybody else, and no matter what you did, the boss benefited from it, and it was the boss whose job was to hang on to their jobs at all costs. We have a different understanding of leadership today, and it's more about the servant leader with the understanding of the pyramid reversed, the leader at the bottom providing resources for their team to be successful. So that new understanding of leadership feeds very nicely into the improvisational method, make your partner look good and build on your partner's ideas. So in that way, we're not offering a philosophy that is so shockingly different as it might have been 30 years ago. On the other hand, yes, you're right, because there is so much working in isolation nowadays, people working from home, or people, even if they go to the office, not necessarily working in a lot of large in-person teams, that dynamic has been lost a little bit, and so we're helpful in bringing that back.
Thank you, super.
Ken helped me. I have a team of 8 people that I acquired, and very different viewpoints, very different personalities. We're all on Zoom, and Kenn came and did an offsite, virtual offsite improv. It was awesome. It was the most fun people had. It actually gelled people together, very senior women, younger people, just not a gel, but with the tools that he brought, we had so much fun that I think there was an understanding that as a team we could have fun, even though people came from very different ages, work styles, and tenure at the company. So, thank you, Ken. So it really does, it's great in person, but with Zoom, it was the most fun we've had in a year and a half on Zoom.
Thank you, Holly. I appreciate you saying that. Yes, sir.
I don't have a question, but I have a couple of hopefully interesting benefits from being around improvisation.
Yes, please.
My mother ran an improv theater for decades in Portland, from what you said, must have been the earliest days, I think. And one of the events that came out of that was she introduced me to one of her actresses, who I've kind of been involved with for 55 years.
He's the best, that guy.
The other one was,
Yeah.
fast forward 20 years, they made the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest in Salem, right down the road from Portland. And they had in the newspaper somewhere a notice that they were having auditions for the movie. And some of my mother's friends said, "You go down and audition and you'd be great." And she said, "Oh, that's ridiculous." So she finally went down. And as it turned out, the audition, every other actress who was auditioning had to have a script. That's just what they did. So there's one improv person, and how this qualified her for the movie, I don't know, but she's in the movie. If you want to check
How
it
wonderful.
in.
What was the name of the improv company that you ran? Do you remember?
Playbox Players.
How wonderful.
Yeah.
Did you want to share your mom's name? I won't ask you.
Nurse Ratchet.
Actually, you're warm on that. Unfortunately, she wasn't Nurse Ratchet, but she was the nurse right toward the end of the movie who threw Jack Nicholson's, all the people he invited in for a party in the hospital, threw them all out. So she had half a dozen or 10 lines.
That's
in
wonderful.
the movie.
That's exciting.
They were not improvised, however.
Well, thank you very much. Take an improv class, you could be in a Jack Nicholson movie. Right, I think we have time for one more. Last one.
Was the committee that was in San Francisco in the 60s an improv theater?
Yeah, the committee was an improvisational theater. I forget the name of it right now, but there's a really wonderful documentary that was made recently that's out there, maybe on one of the streaming services or on YouTube, that talks all about that. But that was the day when all of these things were blossoming. It started in the mid-50s with the Compass Theater, Paul Sills and David Shepard, but it was starting to percolate at different places in the country around that same time. And by the mid-60s, a lot of these very famous foundational companies were in operation.
They would take the Chronicle, tear up a page, pass out a page to everybody, and then you built the story from that, and they would go for 1 hour.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. All right, my friends, thank you so much for having me.
That's probably the most fun we've had since the page day, my brother. In your name, we will donate this prosthetic hand for someone in need. It's called an LN4 hand. It was invented by a Rotarian.
Wow.
So it will go to somebody to help them become more mobile in their society. So thank you very much, Ken.
I'm very honored. Thank you.
Great. Thanks. We have time for a joke. Does anyone have a joke for today? I've got one if you don't. Okay, go ahead.
Does it work? Does this thing work?
Yeah.
No.
So this gentleman has a pretty good relationship with his doctor. They talk about personal things. And he says to his doctor, you know, I'm concerned that my wife is losing her hearing. We said, well, let's try a simple experiment. Let's figure out some pattern. Let's figure out if we've got some evidence of this. So when she's not looking at you, say something to her. And then if she doesn't respond, go a little bit closer, say it again, and so forth and so on, so you get an answer. So she's in the kitchen with a chopping knife, we're getting dinner together, and he's in the doorway saying, honey, what's for dinner? No response. Couple steps closer. Honey, what's for dinner? Nothing. A couple steps closer and so forth and so on. So he's right behind her. Not too close, but she's got that knife in her hand. But he says, honey, what's for dinner? She puts the knife down and turns and says, for the 5th time, chicken.